As a child, growing up in this congregation of the liberal Jewish synagogue, I cannot remember ever celebrating Purim, the festival that we will celebrate on Monday night and that falls on Monday night and Tuesday. The high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were, of course, major festivals. At Sukkot, all the children of the religion school, bearing little posies of flowers and led by two older children carrying the lulav and etrog, processed round the old synagogue, the synagogue that was here originally when I was growing up, on Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot, while the choir sang the Hallel. I think Tim probably is the only other person here who remembers that. As instructed, we then amassed around the bimah in the old synagogue and inserted each small bunch of flowers that we were carrying into what must have been specially made niches at the edge of the large bimah, which was completely covered and decorated with fruit and vegetables and a harvest loaf in the shape of a wheat sheaf. I remember as well the all-night tikkun at Shavuot and the dancing with the scrolls at Simchat Torah. But Purim was all but erased. I don't think we ever made mishloach manot, the special gift baskets that our children will create tomorrow morning here at Rimon for the people who attend the Out and About Club on Tuesday evenings. So why wasn't this festival included in our LJS calendar, even for the children? It was for several reasons, all of them quite well known. First is the fictional nature of the story of Esther. A drunken Persian king banishes his queen, Vashti, and holds a beauty competition to choose a new queen. This new queen is Esther, a young Jewish woman in exile from Judah, living with her cousin Mordechai. The king's second in command is Haman, the Agagite, whose anger is aroused by the refusal of Mordechai to bow down before him. And so Haman urges the king to issue a decree to kill all the Jews in his kingdom. It's a story of survival, Jewish survival against the odds. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. A variation, if you like, of the Pesach story, where Haman is a substitute for Pharaoh, and Esther and Mordechai could be seen as being personifications of the Jewish people. A second reason for this discomfort with Purim has to do with the way the story ends, a tale of revenge in which not only Haman and his 10 sons are hung on the gallows, but the Jews throughout the king's provinces fight for their lives in an intense battle and dispose of tens of thousands of their enemies, ending with a day of feasting and merriment. And behind a settling of this score is yet a darker story connected to the character of Haman and an age-old enmity that is related throughout the Hebrew Bible and referred to in an additional Torah portion, which is traditionally read on the Sabbath before Purim, in other words, tomorrow, passage from Deuteronomy 25, where the Israelites are commanded, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. And this is a passage just a few verses long that refers to the battle fought against the Amalekites just after the Israelites had come out of Egypt. The refugees are described as famished and exhausted, but they're attacked by surprise by Amalek, who cut down all the stragglers at the back of the procession. And this passage from Deuteronomy commands us in a somewhat ironic way to blot out the memory of Amalek. Do not forget to blot out the memory of Amalek. And so this enmity between Amalek and Israel becomes a kind of, iconic's the wrong word for it, but it becomes a kind of symbolism throughout the Hebrew Bible, and it's never forgotten in Tanakh. Amalek becomes Agag. King Agag is a descendant of Amalek. And Agag is the king whom Saul is to assassinate along with all the Agagites. Saul fails to carry out this command from God through Samuel and spares the women and the children and the animals. Not a bad thing, you would think. But it seems as though Saul has done the wrong thing, and as though this embodiment of evil, Amalek, the Agagites, is never eliminated. That is, until the very end of the book of Esther, for Haman, as you well know, is an Agagite, a descendant of Amalek. And in those verses that conclude the book, Haman and every one of his descendants are killed. But actually, the enmity between the Amalekites and the Israelites, Amalekites, Agagites, they're sort of interchangeable, stretches back even further in the Torah, because Amalek is the grandson of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, through his son, Eliphaz, Esau's son, Eliphaz. And in a sense, by rooting that in the book of Genesis, in the patriarchal stories, the wound goes so deep and resurfaces again and again and again, generations later, so that you have a sense that the story never ends, because, of course, we come back in our cycle of reading to Genesis and Exodus. So we tell this story of hostility and enmity again and again and again. When I arrived at the LJS as a newly minted rabbi in 1986, the existing rabbis had invited Leobeck College's wonderful Bible teacher, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Maganet, as he then became Professor Jonathan Maganet, to give a lecture on the more scholarly aspects of the book of Esther. So that was a bit more acceptable than reading the Megillah and shouting and hooraying at Esther and Mordechai's name and booing at Haman's name. And he gave a wonderful lecture, which I go back to again and again, called The Liberal and the Lady, Esther Revisited. The liberal being here Claude Montefiore, one of the founders of our synagogue, who was absolutely against the celebration of Purim, who admired the sacrifice of the lady, who was Esther, but objected to the nationalist tones of the book of Esther. And Professor Maganet drew a parallel between the story of Joseph and the characters of Mordechai and Esther, both foreigners in a strange land, Joseph in Egypt, Mordechai and Esther in Persia, both rising to powerful positions of leadership in these foreign countries. So from that time, 1986 onwards, there was a sense of liberal rabbis, and not all liberal rabbis were quite as stringent as they were in this synagogue, but there was a sense of a kind of loosening of that stringency and disapproval of Purim. Why not allow an inversion of all that we take very seriously and earnestly in our Judaism just for one day, and have a day of unbridled fun, when everything that characterizes our Judaism, dignity, the law, propriety, could be overturned? So it began to be okay to dress up, to mock, to have fun, to read the Megillah, to get so drunk that one couldn't distinguish between blessed be Mordechai and cursed be Haman, to quote the Talmudic formula. But on Purim in 1994, Baruch Goldstein, an American-born supporter of Kach, Meir Kahana's terrorist religious Zionist party in Israel, entered the cave of Machpelah, which served as a mosque in Hebron, and shot dead 29 Muslim worshippers and wounded 125 others. It was a terrible and tragic moment for Palestinians and a shocking, deeply sobering moment for Jews, as though Goldstein, a Jew, was reenacting the role of Jews at the end of the Esther story. Nearly 30 years later now, many Jews, and I have to say myself included, still anticipate Purim with a sense of foreboding and fear, and no more so than this year, following the killing of 2 Israeli brothers last week and a vengeful rampage through the Palestinian village of Huwara by Jewish settlers who killed 1 Palestinian, wounded hundreds of others last weekend, and torched cars and properties in retaliation for the 2 murders. The Book of Esther and the Festival of Purim carry 2 contradictory elements: the murderous, revengeful, hate-filled enmity between different nations and peoples, and a light-hearted, humorous, ironic, parodying element that allows us to laugh at ourselves. At this moment in time, when it's hard to escape from the violence of war in Ukraine, displacement and the loss of people and lives through natural disasters, through war and famine, when there is no live peace process that we know of in Israel and Palestine, Purim and the Book of Esther reflect all our fears and apprehensions about the world and our place in it. So I'm ambivalent about this festival of Purim, which falls on Monday night and Tuesday. The end of the Book of Esther is horrible, and Purim has given rise over the centuries to reckless rites and licensed mad men to commit terrible crimes. We should fear the religious fundamentalists in Israel and Palestine and seek to raise a liberal voice of dialogue, tolerance, and peace building. I'm not sure that Purim is the right platform for that, but if we can laugh at ourselves and parody the absurd, perhaps that is the beginning of taking ourselves down a peg or 2 to learn the lessons of humility. Amen.